Let's bring in Ben Goessling from the Star Tribune, talk a little Vikings today. Ben, the Monday night game is what it is. We talked about it a lot on Access Vikings this week. If they don't win this game, I think a lot of us would be surprised. The Bears have lost 7 in a row, showed some tendency towards capitulation in their loss to the 49ers, 38-13. You trotted out all sorts of kind of ghastly stats. They were outgained 319-4 in the first half of that game, which generally is not the path to victory.
How do you do? I mean, it takes a certain level of performance to get to that stat.
But, nothing's taken for granted. And as much as we talk about the Vikings now being on, another 6-game winning streak, a lot of these have not come easy. Even that Falcons game, which ends with a 3-touchdown advantage, that was 21-21 and very much in the balance going into the fourth quarter. So this team is playing better and winning by and large a little bit better lately, more so than when they were kind of like stumbling through the AFC South. But I still feel like there's issues for the present and the future for us to dissect even ahead of this Bears game.
Yeah, you're right. There are. And I think the run defense, we talked about it a little bit, I think, this week on Access Vikings. But, I mean, they've given up 150-plus the last 2 games after not having done that all year. So, I mean, the only team that had run for more than 110 on them all year had been the Lions in that loss on October 20th that is looming so large in the NFC standings. But it was 154 against the Cardinals 2 weeks ago, and then 158 against the Falcons last week. And that was a lot of the reason the Falcons were in that game. I mean, Cousins made a few throws, but a lot of what they were trying to do was control things with that group. And the other piece of that we've seen the last 2 weeks is the time of possession stats that you've seen the defense on the field a lot. And I do think that becomes something of a concern. I think we talked about it this week too, but when you have older players like Stephon Gilmore and Harrison Smith, that they're still playing an awful lot, that, their bench is longer than it's been, but it's still not going to be something where you're able to reduce the workload on those guys a whole lot on game day.
Right.
So the best way to do it is to get off the field, and it becomes more difficult to do that if you are not able to stop the run and keep yourself out of 2nd and 3 or 3rd and 1, that kind of thing. So I think that's a concern. And then the other one that's near and dear to your heart is the offensive line.
It is.
They have been better in pass protection. I actually wrote about this for the Access Vikings newsletter on Friday. Their pass protection stats have been a lot better over the last few weeks than we've seen throughout the year. I think pass block win rate, they're like 6th in the league, and they have had, when you're considering the fact that they lose their left tackle and lose the second highest paid left tackle in the league, and they've been able to survive. That's certainly a credit to Cam Robinson. But I think you are going to see that group, especially up the middle, be tested as we come down the stretch. And you saw some of those things on Sunday where the Falcons are able to get free runners, and you have people that are probably put in tough spots, I think, on some of those blitzes that we saw on Sunday where Bradbury or Brando gets put in a tough spot. But sometimes you still have to be able to step up and deal with tough spots. The weighty downs, as Kevin.
The weighty downs, yes.
All of them. Yeah. I mean, there's, and what he means by that sometimes is more of a, hey, you're not getting any help on this play. You're going to be one-on-one. You have to win your matchup.
Right.
But they are going to be in those spots as we head down the stretch. I mean, inevitably, they're going to run into a situation where they're tasked with a tough pass rush in the playoffs. So I think both lines of scrimmage, that stuff tends to matter a lot in January. And I think that's probably where, if you're looking for a reason to say there's some level of concern or some level of things that need to get tightened up here, that's probably as good a place as any.
I want to ask you in a minute about what the biggest concern is, maybe a little bit of like matchup stuff as we kind of settle into this idea. Like, hey, Detroit could lose to Buffalo. Things could be different, but the Vikings have to win a lot of games against good teams to have a chance even at winning the division, and have to have Detroit lose some along the way. But before we get to that, were you seeing it up close maybe closer than you had this whole season. Were you surprised even a little bit, even after watching him on TV, to see some of the decisions and just like how diminished to a certain degree, like not like all the way gone, but diminished Cousins looks as just from wherever his peak at Minnesota was?
Yeah, it certainly has been noticeable, and I think that Achilles is affecting him to quite a great degree. I mean, and I think we knew that was going to be a change to his game. Not that he's ever been a terribly mobile quarterback, and
No.
I think he has made peace with the fact that that's not going to be a big part of his game. Wasn't before, and was probably going to be less of one going forward. But I think you see it on a lot of the stuff with the throws, and
Yeah.
I mean, you hear O'Connell talk all the time about base balance body position. He spends a lot of time drilling mechanics with quarterbacks, not in a way that you hear so much in the NFL. It seems like it's more of a pitcher thing in baseball,
Mm-hmm.
but he talks about it a lot. And I think, especially when you see Sam Darnold, there is a contrast there because Darnold, for the most part, I think throws from an awfully powerful base. He's got a bigger arm than
Oh,
Cousins in general.
that a lot of guys do. I mean, he's got one of
Yeah,
the
I
better
mean,
arms
he's
in the
got a
league.
pretty
Yeah.
unique arm, but some of that is not just arm talent. Some of that is the force you deliver from your lower
Mm-hmm.
half,
Mm-hmm.
as so much of sports is. It's you deliver force from your core, and then it goes out to your extremities from there. So that's a lot of it for Darnold. I think he makes a lot of things happen because of the power he generates from his hips. Cousins, I think, when you're not able to drive off of that back foot in the same way that you would before, that is going to limit you. And he may be at that point where it's decisions, and we've certainly seen decision-making things with Cousins in the past where he'll just have some picks thinking, where are you going with that? But
Yeah.
if you're at that point, and every athlete gets to this point where it's, my brain says, oh, I can make this throw. I made this throw 6 years ago.
Right.
And then your body says, yeah, but you're not the same guy as you
Right.
were 6 years ago. The Achilles may be accelerating some of that trend with him. Yeah, it has been noticeable. I think just the
Mm-hmm.
times we've seen him this season, it does seem quite a bit like he's been reduced by that. And could that get better as he's farther removed from it? I suppose, but generally betting on things to improve with age,
Right.
he says somewhat ruefully, considering
Yeah. Me
like we
too.
all face it.
Yeah. I mean,
Father Time's undefeated, and
it's
that may be the
undefeated.
case here too.
Until you get to a certain age, you are on an upswing, but
Yep.
that is not the right side of 28 that
No.
he's on right now in terms of physical peak. So as we think about, we don't want to get too far ahead. Like I think people are just genuinely enjoying this season. They read a fun Drew McGarry piece in Defector, just like he doesn't care what happens the rest of the way. He's just like, this team, I had no expectations. I'm just enjoying this, and I think some Vikings fans are
He's
kind of
taking
feeling
Mike
that.
Tyson's advice, in other words.
Yeah, just enjoy the season. All
Yep.
right,
Yep.
Yep, exactly. Waiting
Mike
out the
Tyson was in the house on Sunday at USB.
Was he? I didn't see
Yeah,
that. Good for him.
he was there. They brought him out, and they asked, kind of for his favorite memories, and he didn't miss a beat. He he goes, "Yeah, my favorite moments when we beat the Packers at Lambeau and Randy Moss mooned him," and that was like on the on-field interview with Tatum Everett during the middle of the game. He knew how to play the hits.
He knew how to play.
He knew what they were looking for, and I think he dropped and enjoy the season in there too.
I think people would agree that was the highlight of the. Definitely, that was not the year before that when they started out 6-0 and didn't make the playoffs.
Yes.
Although that year that they beat the Packers, they started 5-1, stumbled in at 8-8, and then somehow made the playoffs. This year, what's that?
They backed into the playoffs.
They did. They backed in and showed up.
Inside joke, but we'll tell that story someday.
In that same posture, but they're almost certainly going to get in. We might even be post dating ourselves. They could be in already. We're recording Thursday. If something happens Thursday night in the Thursday night game, they could already have clinched.
The Rams lose.
If the Rams lose, that's what it is. So we're looking at it like, still a chance to catch Detroit, but let's just hypothetically say they don't catch Detroit, but they're 2 games clear of everybody else. Being the 5 seed is pretty likely, or even the 6 seed potentially if Green Bay would catch them, but probably going to play one of the 2 lesser division winners on wild card weekend, and they'll be the road team for that, even though they'll have a better record. If you're looking at their flaws, which I think we'd identified as, run defense lately,
Yeah.
the age and health of their secondary, especially Gilmore, and then the interior of their line, and you're looking at potential matchups against the Seahawks, who they're going to see already here in a
Yep.
little while,
Yep. In a week.
potentially the Rams, who they've already lost to. Those are probably the two front runners in the NFC West now. Um, or maybe the Buccaneers, or possibly even the Falcons. The Falcons are only a game behind still Tampa Bay, and they have that tiebreaker, even though they've lost 4 in a row and Tampa's won 3 in a row. It's soon to think about matchups, but even like play style, things like that. Like if you're the Vikings, what are you most afraid of, and maybe who are you least wanting to see based on what those other teams' strengths might be?
Yeah, I think the team I probably put at the top of the list, there would probably be two that I would say I would not want to see. I think Tampa is probably at the top of that list.
Okay.
Because Mayfield has played well. I mean, very similar kind of career arc to Sam Darnold. But the bigger reason for that is they do some things that could make things difficult. And we saw it last year in the opener. They've got a defense that can bring some pressure in different ways. I think Todd Bowles does a really good job with that, just finding ways to get to quarterbacks and affect them. And that is a team that when we talk about the Vikings' biggest issues on the offensive line, they are set up to make things difficult. Vita Vea in the middle of that group, and Kalijah Cansey has come on for them as a pass rusher this year. He's got 6 sacks. So with those guys, and then Levante David still kicking around at age 34, they have some players on that defense, and then obviously Antoine Winfield Jr. in the secondary. So I think that's a tough matchup. It's not going to be a place where you say you have to go down there and win and their fans are crazy and all of that. But I don't think that's a great matchup. And then the other one I would say is not necessarily a team they'd want to see would be the Rams again.
I agree with that. Yeah.
That, with a coach and a quarterback that have been there and had a lot of success in the playoffs, you'd get a lot of tickets for that game. You'd have a lot of fans there, but that isn't a draw that I think would be terribly favorable to them either. If it's Seahawks or Falcons, I think that's a little, the Seahawks, I don't think that's not a trip you necessarily want to make either. And maybe that's somewhat because of all of the history there. Maybe we're unfairly weighting that. We'll know more about that in a week.
Yeah.
With Seattle. But of the 4 teams we're talking about, I think if they were to be injected with truth serum and given full anonymity to speak candidly, I would have to think, give me another matchup with our old quarterback in the playoffs would be the one that most people would say they want.
Even though Atlanta has had a generally better defense than what they showed, and that their running game is pretty good, I think you're right. I think that's probably my order of preference. And that gets to another thing that I wanted to get to as we get into a Sam Darnold discussion. Like a lot of the Darnold narrative, which has been creeping upwards towards, should they keep him?
It's been a big narrative week.
It's been a big narrative week. It's been big for that. And, some of it went into the Falcons game, obviously, and there was some reporting that the Vikings haven't, like it was some sort of surprise that they haven't started any kind of discussions with him. Like we all know that. Like it's just not what they're going to do. And then he goes on, throws 5 touchdowns, and then it only gets louder. He's having a very good season. But I think the way it's being framed, as I was thinking about this, was interesting because some of it's being framed like, okay, well, if he wins the Super Bowl, and I've been guilty of that. I've said this a few times, like if he wins the Super Bowl, maybe you have to reconsider. But anything short of that, well, that's kind of, it's within his control a little bit because, he's the quarterback of the team. But like in a normal year, they would have a much easier potential Super Bowl path if they didn't have the 12-1 Lions sitting there, making it likely that they're going to have to win 3 road games just to get into the Super Bowl. That's not necessarily on Sam Darnold. I think maybe we have to reframe that just a little bit to talk more about his performance. And again, I think his whatever playoff performance would factor into it. But like if he plays well and they just happen to lose because they have an impossible path, I don't think that necessarily is like your trump card. The bigger trump cards, I think, are you don't want to pay him a ton of money. You want the cheap
Yeah.
quarterback contract. It's not so much how far they go. I don't think, even if I get the idea of, well, yeah, it would be really hard to move on from him if he wins the Super Bowl. It just seems like an unfair kind of expectation or something to put on him.
Yeah, that's probably true. And it's probably important to note here that everybody is, sort of throwing metrics out there by an arbitrary standard. I mean, we have not heard from the Vikings saying, well,
True.
it has to get to this level. I think they are certainly watching to see if he plays at a level that you say we can't let this walk out the door. And has he done that already? Probably in some sense. I mean, he's played awfully well, but I think you do want to see that in settings where it is more important, I guess, just in December games and then kind of down the stretch here in the playoffs. So yeah, maybe there's a little bit of that in their thinking, but nobody, at least as far as I can tell, is going from some backroom conversation with somebody in the Vikings building saying, okay, this is the level, this is the game that we need to see Sam Darnold get to before we say, all right, forget it, we're paying him all the money.
Right.
I just don't think that's how they're thinking about it. And
No.
if they are, or if they will, I don't think we're there yet. So we're all kind of doing this. But you're right. It is a path that's going to be awfully difficult because in a normal year, if you were saying they need to go in and win 2 home games to get to the Super Bowl, if they're the number 1 seed with that record, and everybody has to come into US Bank Stadium, which has been a really tough place to play this year, I think that's a easier bar to clear.
No, for sure. Yeah.
Not that it's ever easy. I mean, Vikings are saying, listen, man, they haven't been to the Super Bowl. This is my favorite. I say favorite with apologies to Vikings fans who are going to cringe when I say it, but how long has it been since they've been there? Jimmy Carter, who recently celebrated his 100th birthday, was the president-elect, not the president-elect, set to take the office a couple weeks after the Super Bowl. The Super Bowl was very early back then, but that was the last time they were there, was when Jimmy Carter was the president-elect. So I get that it's been difficult, but I think getting there with 2 games at home is an easier path than having to go on the road. And then game 2 is either in Detroit or Philly, probably in that scenario.
Yeah.
You got to go beat the other one of those teams on the road to get there. That's a lot.
That's a lot.
You may get great quarterback play and still not be able to win all those games. And yeah, you're right. Does that then come down on him? Should that be kind of the litmus test with no room for any extenuating circumstances there? That may not be the best way to evaluate that either.
I was 2 months old the last time they were in the Super Bowl. So it has happened in my lifetime. But you're right. It has been 48-ish years since they were in the Super Bowl. I believe they've lost 6 NFC title games since then. I think they lost 1 not too long after that. Then, of course, 87, 98, 2000, 2009, and 2017. Some of them more excruciating than others. Some of them blowouts. Never just a normal game. Never just a normal, like, oh, well, 24-13, we gave it our best, but it wasn't our day. It's either a complete butt kicking or a completely excruciating finish at the end.
Can you feel like all of the people hitting the 30-second fast forward on this?
Sorry, yes.
Now?
Like, stop talking about it. Stop talking about it.
Screaming at us, guys, we know. We know
I get
all
it.
that. Stop reminding us.
I know. I'm sorry. Yes.
I'm participating in it too.
You are, but I guess it's a hard path, is what I'm trying to say, and I don't think they have not gotten to an NFC title game, I think, since '87 without the benefit of a bye week somewhere in there. So that's they've only been the 1 seed, I think, since in '98. Other than there were 2 seeds, but there's only 1 spot for a bye now. That was a big change when you went to the 7 teams in the playoffs, where you only get the 1 bye now for the very best team. But
I think '87 was the last time they won 2 playoff games. And maybe we're kind of saying the same thing by different metrics.
No, you're right, though. That is.
It's the last time they won 2 playoff games in a year.
Yes, absolutely was. Absolutely was. So there's that. And the Darnold question then, though, one is, kind of that thing I was just talking about. 2, though, is this feels kind of, I'm sure it's not unprecedented, but every other kind of conversation about keeping somebody like this, like the Buccaneers didn't have anybody they'd particularly drafted, right? When they brought in Baker Mayfield, the Seahawks didn't have anybody lined up behind Geno Smith that I can remember. It was did they have? I can't remember who exactly they had.
So.
I don't think they had anybody there. And then every other conversation you usually have, I think we talked about this in Access Vikings, is it's like somebody at the end of their career. Like there's a replacement for a guy who's 37 or 38. Like you're trying to replace Aaron Rodgers or Kirk Cousins in Atlanta. Like there's a young up and comer who's going to take away the job. Like Darnold's only 27, so it's a very unique situation where he comes in for this 1 year. They've already drafted their quarterback of the future, but he's not exactly a quarterback of the past yet either.
No, it's a problem. I mean, you could say it's a good problem to have. That's true. It's a problem they didn't intend to have. It very clearly was not a problem they intended to have, because if you thought Sam Darnold was going to do this, you're probably not drafting J.J. McCarthy. You're probably saying, let's use that pick on something else.
A corner.
Help. A corner.
A guard.
Yeah. Hey, everybody else is taking offensive players. Let's take two of the defensive players. It could be a guard on offense, or you say, let's take the Latu from Oregon and Dallas Turner, and you've got both those to play with, and you build that defense, and you say, Sam Darnold's here, he's our guy. I don't think they intended for that to happen, because if they were that confident, you're not taking the quarterback of the future. So it is an interesting problem. It's a good problem because they've gotten enough out of him.
Oh, yeah.
You had this be a part of the conversation, but that was not – I just think the way they operated, if that was plan A, there is no need for them to use the 10th pick in the draft than J.J. McCarthy.
No, although they have been craving the rookie scale contract for a while too. So, I mean, it's not like they would have walked into this. They probably would have signed Darnold to a multi-year deal or something if they thought he was potentially this good, and then reap the benefit for more than 1 year. But as it is, he's going to be expensive.
Cost savings down the road.
He's going to be expensive next year. So this conversation we're having comes down to that. Maybe my final thing is, like, if you think enough of Darnold, there's still just that financial component, right? Like, he's probably going to command $40 million next year. Like, that seems, based on his play and what the quarterback market is, that's pretty reasonable. Like, you are getting him for 10 this year. You've got J.J. McCarthy for 5 next year. You're probably going to have to sign somebody else that's a veteran, that's maybe not just, a $2 million veteran. It might be a $5 million veteran. Yeah, there you go.
That's another really deep cut.
That is a deep cut. That is a deep cut. But he's a veteran. But like 40, like, let's say $35 million difference between, what you could do. Like, that's 2 or 3 really good players on a team that, is going to have a lot of cap space, but also is going to have a lot of needs.
They have 38 players on the roster for next year.
Not a lot.
That it's not a lot. And let's think about the places that they do not have signed talent. Cornerback is at the top of the list. They need a starting guard one way or the other, whether it's back to Ed Ingram or Dalton Reisner or somebody else. That could be a place that they actually want to spend some money. I think there could be some momentum internally to make that happen.
Okay.
They do not have a running back signed for next year. That can happen, but again, we're talking about a team that doesn't have a ton of draft picks. So you are going to need some of that cash to fill out the roster and be competitive again. So could they do it? Sure. But Byron Murphy's a free agent. Cam Bynum's a free agent. You go down all of those 1-year guys, you have to figure out which ones of those you want to bring back. I think there are enough needs that it looks to me like the plan has been to line because they talk about 2-year plans all the time. Yeah. And I think the plan has been McCarthy is entering year 1 of a 2-year plan in 2025. Yep. Not that he'll only be the quarterback for 2 years, but they would kind of build the roster for 25 and 26. And then you reassess and you say, okay, we've got 2 more years of him under relatively cheap control. So let's go from there. I just think that if you pay Darnold that much, it changes that plan. And it's also worth noting that if we think about quarterbacks that have played well and earned themselves big time deals that people have come to feel very differently about in not too distant order. The other quarterback on the practice squad right now is an example of that.
Yes.
He beats the Vikings in a playoff game 2 years ago, gets the big deal for $40 million a season. Then he's gone, and then they eat dead money, and now they're back to the drawing board at that position. Unless you're a big Tommy Cutlets guy, I think he's the future of the team. I don't
Drew
think
Lock. No.
Yeah, probably not. So
yeah,
there is that as well. He's played at a level that probably is higher than what we've seen from Daniel Jones at any point, and certainly has the ability to look the part, I think, in a way that is probably a little bit different too. But you just would have to be 100% sure that what you are letting walk out the door is repeatable and sustainable and at a high enough level that you can justify the cost of paying him at the same time that the peak years of the Justin Jefferson deal are going to hit your cap. Because again, when we're talking about the way that they have planned, I do not think that they signed that deal with the expectation of we're doing this and we're paying a quarterback a lot of money, because that is the situation they inherited, where it was paying a quarterback a lot and then paying all the supporting pieces a lot of money as well. And they had to fix the cap situation there. That yes, they have money to spend for a while, but I just think that it's going to be a lot to overcome. Doesn't mean it can't happen, but there are a lot of factors that would route them toward JJ McCarthy if they feel good enough about his health and his development. I just think that that's what Darnold's going to have to overcome to be back here.
I think what's interesting is it potentially puts a fair amount of even greater burden of pressure on McCarthy.
Yeah.
Potentially, like if they let Darnold walk after a really good, or at least a pretty good season of quarterbacking where he took them to the playoffs, there's always going to be that person that wonders, okay, well, what might this have been? If Darnold had just been what you expected him to be this year, kind of a placeholder who went 7-10, there wasn't going to be that pressure. The level he's played at does put some onus on McCarthy, not to be that good necessarily right away, but to play to a certain standard to make you not wonder what if.
Yeah, that's certainly true. And one of the things I think we talked about after they did the Darnold deal in March, and I think I use this phrase, that he was fungible. He was a guy that you could have be the starter, and then when you felt like McCarthy was ready, whether that was week 10 or week 15 or week 1 of 2025, nobody would worry about this very much.
Right.
Everybody would say, well, okay, he served his purpose. We understood what it was. And that's that. He obviously has exceeded that standard enough that we are having a conversation in mid-December that I was not expecting we were going to be having.
No.
I don't know that the Vikings expected that they would go to this level either. And certainly nobody is sad or regretful.
No, of course not. Yeah.
But I just think that the plan and the way that they have constructed all of this, again, is something that this was not something that they had considered in their Monte Carlo simulation of 1,000 possibilities. I mean, maybe in a few, but maybe not in a few. Not the majority of them to trust it.
This is a long tail outcome, I would definitely say. Yeah. Well, maybe the best thing to do is just enjoy it while it's here. It's going to get messy. It's going to get complicated, but hopefully for the Vikings' sake, messy and complicated doesn't describe Monday night against the Bears, their last home game of this 3-game stretch before they go to Seattle next week, then back here for Green Bay, then at Detroit to end the season. We'll see if that one means a lot or doesn't mean a whole lot. A lot of that might be determined by what happens between Buffalo and Detroit this weekend. That's an opportunity maybe for the Vikings to know going into Monday that they could at least, if Buffalo wins that game, control their own destiny in that pursuit of the 1 seed. But a lot left to be determined, Ben, even in a season where a lot has already happened.
Yeah, I mean, if Buffalo wins that game, the Vikings can get their control of their fate back, and then would have to go win in Seattle for the first time in like 20 years, and then beat their 2 fellow playoff teams from the NFC North. So it's still a tough path.
It is.
But yes, they need some help. I mean, we've talked about all the scenarios. They need some help from the Bills if they are going to go and win the division and possibly make it so that only 2 wins in the playoffs at home are what it takes to get to the Super Bowl for the first time since the end of the Ford administration.
The Ford administration.
Okay, now I'm workshopping leads. If they beat the Lions in the
Yes.
NFC Championship game at Ford Field,
Oh, man.
it's not the same family, but
No.
Gerald Ford did play football at the University of Michigan.
He did.
There's something there. I'll have some
Think about it.
overwrought, historically themed lead if they get there. So get your eye rolls ready for that one.
Maybe we should alert your editor in advance.
Oh,
All
yes. I'm sure she heard it. And she's probably.
She was like,
I had the one earlier in the year about Bud Grant and having the biggest lead that they've ever had at Lambeau Field or something since the Bud Grant administration. So
there you go.
There's something like that in there.
Nice. All right, Ben. We'll follow Ben's work. Read the newsletter on Friday. Coverage Monday night and beyond. Ben, we'll talk to you soon.
Sounds good. Thanks, Mike.